Perspective to the problems and solutions, perspective to the issues and answers facing Iowans today. Joining us each Sunday are the newsmakers and the policymakers who make up the stories behind the headlines. Join us for our Sunday edition of Iowa Press at noon and at 7 Sunday night on Iowa Public Television.
You're watching Iowa Public Television.
IPTV.
Acquisition of this program was made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television and by Share Health Plan of Iowa, a partner in bringing you the best in public affairs programs, encourages you to join with them in supporting quality public television.
Welcome to New Hampshire. Gordon Peterson in Bedford, New Hampshire, with a special edition of Inside Washington. God Almighty, said Daniel Webster, has hung out a sign that in New Hampshire he makes men. I would add, Mr. Webster, that New Hampshire strikes fear into the hearts of men who are front runners. Ask Bill Clinton. Ask George Bush. In any case, this retail store is open 24 hours a day, and business is brisk, Tina. How's business in Washington?
Well, Gordon, the Democratic contest looks so wide open at this point that the talk here in Washington this week was about a possible dark horse candidacy. Could a Congressman Gebhardt, a Senator Benson get in after New Hampshire if the field of five doesn't prove strong enough? We'll talk about that coming up, as well as the Mario scenario. But first, let's talk about Bill Clinton and the draft question. Carl, is this issue enough to sink his candidacy?
I think he's a goner. We've got a situation where George Bush is running as your commander-in-chief. He never fails to mention Desert Storm, and a lot of Americans are going to swallow the patriotism bit.
Evan?
I think Clinton's bleeding, but he's still alive. If for no other reason, who's going to go south on Super Tuesday? Is Tsongas going to sweep through Georgia? I wonder.
Margaret?
I think the more people who read the letter, the actual draft letter, the more people who will come back to Clinton. If it were the killer it's predicted to be, Kerry would be having a surge this week because he's the one who volunteered. I think we're very confused on the issue.
Chuck?
I think that Clinton is dead, and the tragedy is that the cause of death was not a war wound, but a lack of candor.
Tom Oliphant, you have been up in Manchester for weeks and weeks now, tracking all the Democrats. What does it look like to you at this point?
Well, you better buckle your seatbelts, folks, because Clinton is anything but dead. I think New Hampshire's rotten economy has provided a context for this story that we in the press have not been able to supply. And if Clinton doesn't waste time talking about how the rest of the world is out to get him, he's going to do very well indeed.
Yeah. If you were to ask me if Clinton's dead, I'd say not yet. And if you were to ask me about George Bush, I would say if I were George Bush, I'd be very jumpy about this upstart Buchanan. You know, he's somebody to be watched. We'll talk about that and other matters in a moment. We'll be right back. Bill Clinton, as you know, was riding high up here in New Hampshire until Jennifer Flowers spoke up. He was still reeling from that when the question of his draft deferment during Vietnam came up. And then this week, the letter he wrote to the head of the ROTC at the University of Arkansas was made public. He released the letter himself, and the day he did so, or the night of the day he did so, I caught up with him at the Elks Lodge in Dover, New Hampshire. If you had released that letter sooner, don't you think it would have helped you?
No, I released it on my own as soon as I could. I only knew about it the day before yesterday.
You didn't remember writing the letter?
No, but I remembered it as soon as I saw it. But, I mean, it was 22 years ago.
Well, why did you request it if you didn't remember it?
Because I wanted to know if there were any records which would document this, just to make sure that everybody understood what the facts were.
You think you can regain momentum here?
Absolutely. I think the people want their election back.
Now, I have to tell you, Tom, that hall in Dover, New Hampshire was filled that night. He may be on the ropes, but I see him counterpunching pretty well.
Constantly. I think the difference up here, Glenn, is that people recognize that these things about his character and background deserve to be an issue. But what they keep telling us is they don't want them to be the issue. And to the extent Clinton has been able to bounce back from each episode, by the way, it's been partly because people can ask him questions, hear his answers in some depth, and partly because he is now talking about the economy again.
But the issue with Clinton is not the economy, but his winnability. He offered. The main thing he had in his favor was that he's the man who could beat Bush. Now,
Charlie,
here's a man who right now, he may have bottomed out, but it looks as if, as of today, he's losing to Paul Tsongas 2-1. This is hardly, you know, that's hardly an advertisement of his electoral strength. And I also hear that he's hemorrhaging in the South.
Can you see Bill Clinton as commander-in-chief? That's a key question.
I think people can, in time, yes. I mean, you have to remember the one different thing about New Hampshire is they've had more time to get to know these people, so it's easier for Clinton to talk to these people. The trouble will happen later in these other primaries where they just get short bursts of him. And I think Charles may be right that the problem in the South could be much worse than here.
Well, I think Charles is right. I think we get a little bit overwhelmed with some of these opinions in New Hampshire. It's my belief that he might have survived the infidelity charge. But in this country, you just can't have back-to-back alleged scandals. There are people, thousands of them, who would agree with what he wrote about the Vietnam War, but they will still zap him in this year when old hard patriotism is going to be the issue, and nobody's going to buy that more than the people in the South that Clinton needed.
You know, when I first heard about that letter, I thought he was cooked, because it made it seem like it was a scam to get out of the draft. It had nothing to do with going back and fighting with his buddies from high school. Instead, it was just to preserve his political options. But when you read the letter, when you actually read the letter, it makes you sympathetic, because it's a 23-year-old fessing up to the fact that he was trying to pull off a fast one. And I think a lot of people are going to relate to that, and I think a lot of people will read that letter.
Well, a whole generation, essentially.
One of the sentences in that letter he gets blasted for is that he wanted to keep his political viability. Well, he was, in his early 20s? He was running for Congress when he was 25. What happened to the notion that I want to grow up to be president? That's a good thing.
But our friend Strobe Talbot, I'm told in the Washington Post this morning, is quoted as saying that, you know, his fellow Rhodes Scholars shared Clinton's concern about what was going to happen in Vietnam. And they had a lot of admiration for him. They admired his guts for laying this all out for Colonel Holmes.
But what's going to hurt Clinton is not the content of that letter. I had a lot of admiration for him, too. I thought that was an extraordinary, passionate and sophisticated letter for a young man to write. What's going to hurt him is not the Clinton of 1969, but the Clinton of 1992, who tried to pretend that the reason he supposedly joined up with ROTC was that he actually intended to join. The fact is, it's obvious that he did that as a way to get away from the draft, at least for a couple of months. What he should and could have said is, look, I was a young man, and for 2.5 months, I did this in order not to go into the draft, but I changed my mind and I went back in. If he had said that and been honest about it, I think he could have gotten past this.
Well, the Democratic Party has to worry about his electability. If you think the Republicans harped on Willie Horton over and over again, you watch what they do with their efforts, unfair, but their efforts to say this guy wasn't willing to fight for his country. We've got George Bush, a war hero, Desert Storm hero. I'm the guy who defeated the communists.
I mean, ultimately the issue is character. And in every presidential election, ultimately it comes down to character. And everybody's going to watch and see, is this guy Slick Willie, or is he somebody with more substance? And we're going to find that out in the next month or two.
But what about the commander-in-chief issue in the South? I mean, when you talk about electability, one of the things that Clinton was supposed to bring to the party was strong in the South.
But that is not how people make decisions on who to prefer in preference primaries. The longer he has a chance to answer people's questions, the better he does on this issue. Believe me, we're 36 hours into this, and his explanation sounds better, sounds credible to older people as well as to younger people.
Margaret, I have a question for you. Who benefits most by this?
Well, it should be Kerry. If we feel badly about what Clinton did, we should feel great about what Kerry did. And yet he's not having the surge he should. If ever his war wounds were going to count, it would be this week, and it's not happening.
The polls don't show that.
The polls don't show it, no.
The story of his candidacy is untaken opportunities.
Tom Harkin claims he's the beneficiary of Clinton's problem. There's a guy who goes for the jugular, not to mention other parts of the anatomy. And of course, as you said, Margaret, one would think Kerry would be, but Paul Tsongas, at least in the polls, is the fellow who's riding high. You agree, Charles?
Yes, well, that's right, Gordon. And the fact that Kerry has not gotten a bump out of the Clinton problems, I think it's proof of the fact that it's not a war issue, it's a character issue. And it's because character is the issue in the Clinton issue, in the Clinton catastrophe, is why Tsongas is getting a lift, because he's the man who's running on character, honesty, and speaking the plain truth.
Yes, but don't forget also, Tsongas has a regional advantage. And I just can't find anybody who believes that across the United States, Tsongas can stand up or get the nomination. And that's why so many Democrats are now pushing the Cuomo write-in. They're talking not just about Gephardt, but they're talking about Lloyd Benson or somebody else to be the nominee because they don't believe Tsongas can win.
Well, Tsongas gives us a holding pattern right now, I think, and he's getting a bit of a free ride. He wasn't taking that seriously. If he's so dull, he must be smart. No one's checking that out. No one's reading that call to economic arms. But for now, he's safe.
He may be the wrong messenger.
I don't agree that Tsongas is safe. I think you have had a rocketing upward of a person to celebrity much too fast for it to be necessarily lasting or meaningful. I can tell you this weekend that Tsongas's people have been screaming at him to stop basking in this celebrity and get back to talking about the economy, which is what people want to hear about. Tsongas has, in effect, let Clinton back into this race this weekend, and the feeling here is that if he doesn't gin it up a little bit, he actually could be in trouble.
Well, Tommy, I think Tsongas may have the... Tsongas may be the wrong messenger, but I think he's got the right message, which is, for a change, people actually want honesty from a politician. This is a new development. And you could easily see a race. You could easily see a race that pits Clinton, the ultimate politician, the guy who says yes to every question, against somebody who dares to actually tell him the truth, that we need to have a little sacrifice to make the economy
But Evan,
better.
I don't think the candidate of pain is the right antidote to Clinton. I don't think that carries over.
I think there's a thirst for honesty out there.
Well, it's not pain that he's selling, it's reality, and people are buying.
Yeah, but I think Tom's right. I think Tom's right. He better keep his eye on the ball, which is the economy. When you talk to the people of New Hampshire, the show business here is interesting, but it's their own lives that they're really worried about right now.
Yeah, but you guys have yet to convince me that the public wants the truth if it means telling them we can't afford a tax cut for the middle class or anybody else. You've got to pay for what you want. I don't believe the soft American public is ready for that message yet.
You know, the thing that made me think that Tsongas can't go the distance is not just that virtually everybody in Democratic and Republican circles believe it, but that at the White House there's a group of folks who are really afraid of this Mario scenario of an unbruised Mario Cuomo having not been in the primaries, coming into the convention and coming out as the white horse. You were talking about that.
Sure. I mean, what the White House is really scared of is that he comes storming in after Super Tuesday. He comes in and he wins New Jersey and California, has just enough delegates to go to the convention with a strong bloc, and then saves the party there and rides on to November.
Tina, the people at the White House better put Mario on the shelf right now and start worrying about Pat Buchanan. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's fair, because what we have heard is that there is, according to you, Gordon, an uptick in his late polls. For a while, though, he had plateaued, and what I was hearing here in Washington was 28%, he's topped out, he can't do anything, he's stalled, and it's over for Pat.
Absolutely not. If you want to name the hot candidate in New Hampshire this weekend, it is Pat Buchanan, and it is all George Bush is doing. I have not seen as dreadful a campaign in my life as the president is running up here. He is playing with this business in the House Ways and Means Committee. He's playing right into Buchanan's wheelhouse this weekend, and he is in real trouble.
If you were advising George Bush, would you advise him to stay home this weekend?
He may not even be able to. See, what Buchanan is able to do is say, he lied to you 4 years ago, he forgot about you, and now he's doing it to you again.
Right. One of his great applause lines is, there's been more sightings of Elvis in New Hampshire than George Bush. And Buchanan is what Bush isn't. He's a great performer. He's a great speaker. The crowds love him. He's put away the crazy stuff, and he just talks about jobs and the economy.
Buchanan's great success is that he's been able to make the issue Bush and not Buchanan. And you already hear recriminations in the White House of people who believe that they should have gone negative on Buchanan, which means just telling people what he said in the past and the kind of weird and eccentric and hateful things he said. Well, they may still do it, but if you do it on the eve of the election, it looks like desperation. And it might not work.
Well, even we in the media cannot overlook the fact of what Pat Buchanan is. He throws out some of the most dangerous views that exist in America. And I have, of course, had to swallow hard in writing columns saying what Buchanan is because it looks as though I'm supporting George Bush.
The Bush campaign has prepared an anti-Buchanan Desert Storm commercial. Evan, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, they prepared a bomb to drop on Buchanan that shows a soldier in desert fatigue standing there in the desert saying, well, when I needed him, George Bush was there, but where was Pat Buchanan? And it would be an effective ad, but it's a negative ad, and they decided not to use it on the theory that they don't want to go too low road going into...
but there's a second, milder negative ad, which is just man on the street interviewees saying, I don't think Buchanan is quite the right man to be president. He might be a little too extreme. It's a rather softer negative ad, but it focuses on Buchanan as a person. That hasn't been run. They might still have to use it.
They're afraid if they go too negative.
Buchanan's ads up here are calling George Bush a liar, all of them, and there's a big gender gap up here.
Well, the ads that the Bush campaign has prepared have been prepared for a very specific reason. There is not just a gender gap up here, there is a gender canyon. Bush's entire margin over Buchanan in the polls is from female voters. Nice guy, he cares. Among men, our stuff is showing them dead even, and that has to do with whether or not Republicans feel Bush will stand up and fight Congress. It's the wimp issue again.
Paul Harrison's calling him a wimp. Buchanan's national campaign director's calling George Bush a wimp.
Well, I wouldn't bet any money that if they get embarrassed enough, if Bush gets embarrassed enough in New Hampshire, when they head south, they're going to pull out some of these ads that they thought they were not going to run. Because when you're in trouble, the low road starts to look pretty high.
Margaret, you were talking about the effectiveness of Bush on the campaign trail and the fact that he didn't get much of a pickup in the polls after his visit just this last week to New Hampshire, but you expect he might get one for this weekend.
Well, maybe he'll do better, but you have Buchanan, who's a great performer. He can really get the crowd going. You can parse his paragraphs. Bush, you can't follow a sentence of his. You know, frogs that float, the nitty-ditty, gritty-bitty dirt band, it doesn't track. And so I think Buchanan, he's had the time, he gets the crowds, he's funny, he's good in back and forth. That Jesuit training wasn't for nothing. And I think he's established his positives. It's going to be hard for Bush to establish his negatives.
But is this a George Bush on the campaign trail who's not going to be able to do well against not only a Republican upstart, but against Democrats?
Well, he's starting late up there.
I think the real campaign strategy is the economy is going to get just enough better for them to win. I mean, I really think it boils down to not screwing up. The economy gets a little bit better. The Democrats self-destruct, and Bush gets 4 more years.
The Rose Garden will start working for him.
And the real issue is what is doing well for the president. I think if he beats Buchanan by 2-1, he's won. But I think if Buchanan gets about to 40%, Buchanan is won. Anything in between, I think, is a draw. And I think those are the parameters, and everybody is looking to see exactly where Buchanan's number ends up.
You know, but when you say he's won, what's the best thing he can do? Embarrass the president?
Well, it's not just look, Buchanan doesn't expect he's going to be the nominee this year. He wants to be the leader of the conservatives in this country and to be a strong conservative candidate in '96. And if he wins in New Hampshire, that means if he does respectably in New Hampshire, and if he does respectably, say, in Georgia or Texas, or in the West, then I think he's a strong, maybe the leading candidate in '96. And that's what this is all about.
Yeah, but in the interim, he could have done more than he wanted, and that is take the White House away from the Republicans. Because if he goes in the South and takes away a lot of white males, and if David Duke is running as an independent, George Bush is in great trouble. And that South, the the Republicans have had since Richard Nixon is gone, and it'll be hard for them to hold the presidency.
You know, it was fascinating here in Washington, standing in the ballroom when George Bush officially announced for re-election. It was an $11 million campaign war chest. I guess it was no shocker, but it was like watching a Ronald Reagan rally all over again. Fresh-faced young Republicans, enthusiastic, and it was conjuring up the same language. It was a tape rewind. Will that play?
Well, basically his strategy is, I am the president. And when the president won a war, that's not such a bad strategy. Don't forget the ultimate card he has to play, which is to bomb Baghdad.
Right. If he goes against Saddam, he wins.
Yeah, but this time he has to get Saddam.
Right.
This time he's got to get Saddam. You can't
Yes.
miss again, otherwise
Right.
it's a desert storm too.
Yeah.
Well, is there a possibility? I mean, we've talked about the negative campaigning against a Republican challenger, but is there on the international scene something that he would do that would drive home the image of Desert Storm in a way that no campaign ad can?
I don't think there really is anything. He doesn't have a way to get Saddam. If he did have a way to get Saddam, he would have gotten him already. And there isn't any other crisis on the scene that's easily attackable. I don't think he's going to be rescued by a crisis in the world. He will be rescued, I think, as Evan indicated, by a pickup in the economy. That's what this is all going to hinge on in the end.
Well, this pickup seems to be a little further away every day than people thought it would be.
It just has to hit here by the fall.
Two things I think we should talk about in this New Hampshire primary. Turnout, how it will be, and the independent voter.
They're very important considerations, and they usually determine the result of the New Hampshire primary. President Bush's problem over Buchanan, for example, Gordon, doesn't really have much to do with preference. It has to do with enthusiasm and dedication. The president's campaign has been flat. He has had no message about his record or the future to send to these people. People are not enthused about it. They may not vote, some of them. On the other hand, every single person who supports Pat Buchanan will vote for him.
Will be out there. Now, the independent voter, what role
Another
does he
major factor. Usually in the New Hampshire primary, about a fifth of the voters are not, they don't consider themselves either Republicans or Democrats. And which party's primary they vote in and how they break out can be very important. It was the source of Gary Hart's victory in 1984, for example. This time, the independents appear to be more interested in the Democratic primary, which means some softer Republicans who might ordinarily support Bush are not going to be participating.
Let me ask you folks inside the Beltway. How significant is the New Hampshire primary this season?
Oh, I think.
Well,
As usual, it's going to be the winnower. I mean, it won't tell us who's going to win, but it'll tell us who's not going to win. Certainly, the third and the fourth candidates on the Democratic side are really very, will be weakened and probably out of the race. And what'd be really interesting is if the Cuomo write-in exceeds either the votes of Harkin or Kerry, they're dead.
I think it could easily be a big mush ball. Everybody in the 20s, you know, Clinton at 25, Tsongas at 25, Cuomo right in at 20, and Kerry or Harkin surviving. You winnow out one person.
we could have another campaign of the living dead where people just keep slogging on.
Except for one other critical variable, and that is money. The other thing that is distinctive about the 1992 campaign is that nobody, particularly on the Democratic side, has very much money. The only way you stay alive is to start winning and to keep winning.
And that's where
Clinton got a
Tsongas
lot
could
of
get a real
money
bump.
this week. It's a bad week for him, and I think he raised close to $1 million.
Well, let me talk about the Republican side. I don't think Pat Buchanan is going to do to George Bush what Eugene McCarthy did to Lyndon Johnson. I don't think he's going to drive him out of the quest for a second term. And another one of the reasons is money. There are a lot of people going to these dinners who are ponying up hundreds of thousands of dollars at every one of these dinners for George Bush. So I think he's going to hang in there.
I got to tell you guys something. Pat Buchanan is all over the television in Boston and in New Hampshire, and the reason he's all over the television is he's got his hands on every right-wing conservative mailing list there is. He is dragging in money by the bucketful, and I will tell you, if this campaign goes south, and Pat Buchanan said on Friday, we go to Georgia next, he will have a lot of money.
But
let me
Tommy,
tell you, some of those Pat Buchanan commercials are devastating. He's got a Grant Wood commercial, a husband and wife sitting there saying, you know, I believed him, I thought he was telling me the truth, and he was lying, and it's arresting.
It's bang, 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 and no answer from Bush.
But Tommy, why then do I see and hear from real conservative Republican fundraisers and consultants here in Washington, Buchanan has stalled? I mean, even with this late week uptick in his polls, that he's had it.
Again, remember, the Buchanan candidacy represents a split in the right-wing movement. It's not a unified movement. But on the ground in a primary state, he is responding to people's angers and to their fears.
And don't forget the tax issue. It's everything. The tax issue is everything, and look what's happened in Washington this week on taxes.
In the South, you're going to get race.
But the tax issue isn't everything on the Democratic side.
No, it is not.
Tsongas is the one who's running on, I'm not going to fool you on taxes. I'm not going to give you a 97-cent reduction in taxes, and I think he's getting a bounce out of that. And if he does, I mean, if he wins a significant victory in New Hampshire, I think he wins the money primary. And he could have the same effect Hart had in '88 before, where you get on the cover of either Evan or Margaret's magazines, and then he becomes a real front runner.
He's going to have to win really big, though. Wow. Really big to get on our cover.
We'll give him to Newsweek. You can have him.
He's going to have to win by an awful big margin.
At least you'll give him an overline.
They're ready to take him to California for money, which he hasn't had yet. They're ready to take him to New York for money. If he wins, he's going to get money, and he's going to get a chance to introduce himself to the rest of the country.
And remember, as he always says, he's never lost an election.
Yeah, but you just do not pay enough attention to perception and to how somebody is viewed on the television. Tsongas does not look like a president of the United States, and a lot of people will vote against him for that reason.
He's going to have to campaign in his bathing suit because he only looks presidential from the neck down.
That's right. It's Speedo.
And splashing in that splish splash, I was taking a bath. It's not going to float.
All right, Margaret's heading off to watch the primary results in New Hampshire. I am too. Lots of us are. Gordon will be joining you up there for the Tuesday balloting, but we'll give you the last word.
Well, remember in 1980, the conventional wisdom, if I may quote one of my favorite magazine's favorite terms, had it that George Bush was going to win the New Hampshire primary. He lost to Ronald Reagan. Then in 1988, it had it that Robert Dole was going to win. He lost to George Bush. So don't place your bets yet, right?
Absolutely. This is Chinatown.
Okay, this is it from New Hampshire. Thanks for being with us on Inside Washington.
Acquisition of this program was made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television and by Share Health Plan of Iowa, a partner in bringing you the best in public affairs programs, encourages you to join with them in supporting quality public television.
Well, the election year is upon us. That quadrennial exercise in outrageous behavior and insincerity is an art form, all in the name of boosting tourism in Iowa and New Hampshire. More observations on the next Mark Russell comedy special only on public television. And remember, an election is only funny in a democracy.
Enjoy more from Mark Russell Wednesday at 7 on Iowa Public Television.
Next time on Frontline, the story of how Konosuke Matsushita, head of the largest consumer electronics firm in the world, conquered the American television industry.
What Japanese firms do is take over a company the Americans have thrown away and make it profitable.
They were setting prices, they were setting the discounts. They had a fix on the market. The story of Matsushita in America, coming from Japan on Frontline.
Tuesday at 8.
TV worth watching brings out the stars. See the fun during Festival on Iowa Public Television, a resource for Iowa's future.
Romantic rumbas, fancy foxtrots, jumping jives. Hello, I'm Julia Strauss. Join us for Championship Ballroom Dancing. You won't want to miss one single step.